The massive alien ship blocked out the sun as it descended toward Earth. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the roof of the Pentagon, watching the vessel that was easily 10 times larger than any human aircraft carrier. The ship's hull gleamed with a silver color that seemed to shift and change as it moved through the atmosphere. Jake had been a soldier for 15 years. He had fought in 3 different wars and thought he had seen everything. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. First contact with an alien civilization was supposed to be handled by diplomats and scientists, not career military officers like him. The ship landed in a field outside Washington, D.C., with surprising gentleness for something so huge. Within hours, the aliens had set up a meeting with world leaders. Jake found himself assigned as the military liaison, a job he never wanted but couldn't refuse. Ambassador Zektar was tall and thin, with gray skin that looked like leather. His eyes were large and dark, and when he spoke, his voice came through a translation device that made him sound like he was speaking from inside a metal tube. He stood before the assembled representatives of every nation on Earth. "People of Earth," Zektar began, "we represent the Galactic Trade Consortium. We have watched your species develop and believe you are ready to join our community of civilized worlds." The room buzzed with excitement. Jake remained silent, but something about the alien's tone bothered him. It reminded him of officers he had known who smiled while giving impossible orders. "However," Zektar continued, "membership in our consortium requires proof of military capability. Your species must demonstrate that it can contribute to galactic security." Jake's unease grew stronger. The alien was talking about military tests like they were entrance exams for college. "We have brought gifts to help you prepare," Zektar said. "Weapons and equipment that will give your forces the tools they need to succeed." Over the next week, massive cargo containers arrived from the alien ship. Jake oversaw the unpacking with his team. Lieutenant Lisa Bennett, a sharp tactical analyst who had graduated top of her class from West Point, examined each item with careful attention. "Sir, these weapons are incredible," Lisa said, holding up what looked like a rifle, made of smooth metal and crystal. "The energy output readings are beyond anything we have." Jake picked up one of the weapons himself. It was lighter than he expected and felt warm to the touch. When he activated it, a beam of blue light shot out and melted a hole through a steel target 50 yards away. "This is better than anything in our arsenal," said Colonel Pete Davis, Jake's commanding officer. Pete was a veteran who had worked his way up from private to colonel over 25 years. "With equipment like this, we can hold our own against anyone." The alien equipment included energy rifles, plasma grenades, and suits of powered armor that made the wearer faster and stronger. Each piece of technology was far beyond human engineering capabilities. Jake's soldiers looked like children who had been given toys from the future. But Jake noticed things that bothered him. The weapons had no safety features that he could identify. The instruction manuals were basic and seemed to assume the user already knew how the technology worked. Most concerning, the aliens showed no interest in training humans to use the equipment properly. "Something feels wrong about this," Jake told Lisa as they watched soldiers practice with the new weapons. "These aliens show up out of nowhere, offer us membership in their club, but first we have to pass their test using their equipment." Lisa nodded. "I noticed the same thing, sir. But maybe that's just how things work in galactic politics. Maybe we're overthinking this." Jake wanted to believe that, but his instincts told him otherwise. In his experience, when someone offered you something that seemed too good to be true, it usually was. The test location was announced a few days later. Epsilon 7, a moon orbiting a gas giant in a nearby star system. The aliens would transport human forces there to face the Korthak Empire's border guard in what they called a mock battle. "Mock battle," Jake repeated when he heard the news. "What does that mean exactly?" Zektar's translation device made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your forces will engage our allies in combat simulation. No permanent harm will come to either side. It is merely a demonstration of tactical capability." Jake had been in enough training exercises to know that mock battles could be just as dangerous as real ones. People got hurt. Sometimes people died. But he had his orders, and Earth's future membership in the galactic community depended on this test. Colonel Davis assembled the best soldiers from every branch of the military: Marines, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, and Air Force pilots all volunteered for the mission. Jake found himself in command of 300 of Earth's finest warriors, equipped with weapons they barely understood, preparing to fight aliens they had never seen. The night before departure, Jake walked through the base where his soldiers were making final preparations. He watched Sergeant Amy Clark, a Marine sniper with 2 tours in Afghanistan, practicing with her new energy rifle. The weapon was supposed to be more accurate than anything she had ever used, but Jake could see frustration in her face as she missed targets she should have hit easily. Nearby, Corporal Ben Wright was trying to understand the powered armor's control system. Ben was an engineer who could fix anything mechanical, but the alien technology operated on principles he had never encountered. "Sir?" Lisa approached Jake with a tablet full of data. "I've been analyzing the weapon specifications. There are some inconsistencies in the power output ratings. Some of these numbers don't make sense." Jake looked at the screen, but the technical details were beyond his understanding. "What do you think it means?" Lisa shrugged. "Probably just differences in how humans and aliens measure energy output. Their science is so far ahead of ours. I'm probably missing something obvious." Jake hoped she was right, but the feeling in his gut said otherwise. Tomorrow they would find out if Earth's military could measure up to galactic standards. Jake just hoped they would all survive the lesson. The transport ship dropped Jake Morrison's forces onto the surface of Epsilon 7, just as the moon's twin suns began to rise. The landscape was rocky and barren, covered with craters from ancient meteor impacts. In the distance, Jake could see the Korthak Empire's forces setting up their positions on higher ground. "Looks like they got here first," Colonel Pete Davis said through the communication system built into their helmets. "They have the advantage of position." Jake studied the enemy through his scope. The Korthak soldiers were bigger than humans, with thick armor that gleamed in the sunlight. Their weapons looked sleek and deadly. Even from a distance, Jake could see that their equipment was more advanced than what the humans had been given. "All units move to Grid 7 Alpha," Jake ordered. "We need to get closer before we can engage effectively." The human forces advanced across the rocky ground. Sergeant Amy Clark led a squad of snipers to a ridge overlooking the battlefield. Corporal Ben Wright positioned his engineering team near a large crater where they could provide support. The first shots came from the Korthak positions. Beams of red energy streaked across the battlefield, striking the rocks around the advancing humans. Jake was surprised by how powerful the enemy weapons were. Each shot left smoking holes in stone that would have stopped human bullets. "Return fire," Jake commanded. The humans raised their energy rifles and began shooting back. Blue beams of light flew toward the Korthak positions, but something was wrong. The shots that should have been deadly barely scratched the enemy armor. Jake watched in horror as his most accurate shooters fired direct hits that did nothing more than leave scorch marks. "What the hell?" Amy Clark's voice crackled through the radio. "I put 3 shots center mass on that target, and he's still standing." More red beams came from the enemy positions. This time they found their targets. Jake watched 2 of his soldiers get hit and go down. The powered armor they wore offered some protection, but it was clear that the Korthak weapons were far superior. "Fall back to the crater," Jake ordered. "We need cover." The human forces retreated to the large crater where Ben Wright had set up his position. The rocky walls provided some protection from the enemy fire, but Jake knew they were trapped. The Korthak had the high ground and better weapons. It was only a matter of time before they would be overrun. "Sir, I don't understand what's happening," Lieutenant Lisa Bennett said as she crouched next to Jake behind a boulder. "Our weapons should be more powerful than this." Jake looked at his energy rifle. The weapon that had seemed so advanced on Earth now felt useless in his hands. "Maybe we're doing something wrong," he said, but he didn't believe his own words. More enemy fire poured into the crater. The humans were pinned down with nowhere to go. Jake counted his remaining soldiers. He had started with 300. Now he was down to 250. and the numbers were dropping fast. That was when Amy Clark did something unexpected. She threw down her energy rifle and picked up a plasma grenade from her belt. Instead of throwing it at the enemy, she started taking it apart with a small tool from her kit. "Amy, what are you doing?" Jake called out. "This rifle is garbage, sir," Amy replied without looking up from her work. "But these grenades have some serious power. I'm going to make something useful." Jake watched as Amy connected the power cell from the grenade to some wire she had pulled from her damaged armor. She worked quickly, her fingers moving with the skill of someone who had built bombs in combat zones before. Lieutenant Tony Garcia was having his own moment of discovery. His powered armor had been hit by enemy fire 3 times, but it was still working. The Korthak weapons that easily destroyed rocks and metal seemed to have less effect on the human equipment than expected. "Hey, anyone else notice that our gear isn't breaking down like it should?" Tony called out. Ben Wright looked up from his own work. "You're right. I got hit twice and my systems are still running. These suits are built like tanks." Jake began to see a pattern. The human weapons were weak, but they were incredibly reliable. While the Korthak forces had to pause occasionally to let their weapons cool down or recharge, the human equipment kept working no matter what. Amy finished her improvised explosive device and placed it against the crater wall. "Everyone get back," she warned. The explosion sent rocks flying in all directions. When the smoke cleared, Amy had created a tunnel that led deeper into the crater system. "This way," she said. "We can move through these tunnels and come up behind them." Jake made a decision that went against everything he had been taught about conventional warfare. "All units, follow Clark's lead. We're going underground." The human forces began moving through the tunnel system that connected the craters. Amy had shown them that they could use the terrain in ways the enemy didn't expect. If their weapons were weak, they would have to fight smarter. Ben Wright found another use for their equipment. He discovered that the powered armor could be overloaded to create massive energy surges. Instead of wearing the suits, his team began setting them up as remote-controlled bombs. "We can trigger these from a distance," Ben explained to Jake. "The explosion should be big enough to take out their heavy weapons." The tide of battle began to change. The humans stopped trying to fight like the aliens expected them to fight. Instead, they used their weak weapons and reliable equipment in ways that confused and surprised the enemy. Tony Garcia led a team through the tunnel system and came up behind the Korthak positions. The enemy soldiers were so focused on the crater, where they thought all the humans were trapped, that they didn't see the attack coming from their rear. Jake coordinated the assault from his position in the crater. He watched as his soldiers used every trick they had learned in wars on Earth. They fought dirty, used the terrain to their advantage, and turned their weaknesses into strengths. The Korthak forces began to panic. Their advanced weapons and superior position meant nothing when the enemy refused to fight by the rules they understood. The humans were unpredictable, chaotic, and absolutely ruthless in their creativity. By the end of the day, the mock battle was over. The humans had won, but Jake knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple military test. News of humanity's victory on Epsilon 7 spread through the Galactic Trade Consortium faster than anyone expected. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the briefing room aboard the human command ship, reading reports that came from alien sources across the galaxy. The Korthak Empire was demanding an investigation into human tactics, claiming the battle had been unfair. Unfair? Colonel Pete Davis laughed as he read the same reports. They had better weapons, better position, and more experience. How is our victory unfair? Dr. Kate Morgan entered the briefing room carrying a tablet full of technical data. Kate was a scientist who specialized in alien technology, and she had been studying the captured Korthak equipment from the battle. Her face was serious as she sat down at the conference table. "I have some interesting news," Kate said. "I've finished analyzing the weapons the aliens gave us, and I compared them to the Korthak equipment we captured." Jake leaned forward. "What did you find?" Kate pulled up holographic displays showing detailed scans of both sets of weapons. "Our equipment is old, really old. Some of these designs are over 200 years behind current galactic standards." The room went quiet. Lieutenant Lisa Bennett was the first to speak. Are you saying they gave us museum pieces? That's exactly what I'm saying, Kate replied. These weapons were state-of-the-art technology when the Galactic government was first formed. Now they're what aliens use for historical demonstrations. Jake felt anger building in his chest, but also something else. Pride. His soldiers had defeated a modern military force using weapons that belonged in a museum. So we won that battle with antique equipment? Not just one, Kate said with a smile. You embarrassed them. The Korthak are supposed to be one of the premier military forces in the galaxy. They've never lost a mock battle to a new species before. Colonel Davis stood up and began pacing around the room. This changes everything. If they gave us outdated weapons on purpose, then this whole test was designed for us to fail. But we didn't fail, Jake said. We adapted. Over the next few days, Jake reorganized his forces based on what they had learned from the first battle. He divided his soldiers into small teams, each led by veterans who had shown creativity under pressure. Sergeant Rick Stone took command of one unit, focusing on explosive tactics. Lieutenant Sue Palmer led another group that specialized in electronic warfare using their basic equipment. The humans began training with their obsolete weapons in new ways. They stopped trying to use the equipment like modern galactic forces would. Instead, they developed tactics that took advantage of their weapons. Reliability and simplicity. Technician Danny Lopez made the biggest breakthrough. Danny was a young soldier who had joined the military straight out of technical college. He had a talent for understanding how machines worked, even alien machines. Danny discovered that their old weapons could be modified to produce much more power than they were designed for. It's dangerous, Danny explained to Jake as he demonstrated his modifications. These changes will probably destroy the weapon after a few shots, but the power output goes up by 300%. Jake watched as Danny's modified rifle punched a hole through a steel plate that was twice as thick as anything their original weapons could penetrate. How many shots before it breaks? Maybe 10, maybe 15, Danny said. But those shots will hit harder than anything the enemy expects from equipment this old. Medic Carol Davis made her own discovery while treating wounded soldiers from the first battle. Carol had been a nurse before joining the military, and she understood human biology better than most doctors. She found that their basic medical supplies worked better on humans than the advanced alien medicine they had been offered. The alien medical equipment is designed to work on multiple species, Carol explained. It's a one-size-fits-all approach. Our simple supplies are made specifically for human biology. They're actually more effective for us. The second battle was announced 2 weeks later. This time, the location was an asteroid belt near Proxima Station. The enemy would be the Vorthon Armada, a space-based military force known for their advanced fighter ships and orbital weapons. Jake knew this battle would be different from the first. Fighting in space required different tactics and different equipment. The humans had never fought a real space battle before, but they had learned something important from their first victory. They didn't need to fight like aliens. They needed to fight like humans. Commander Frank Butler took charge of the Space Forces. Frank was a pilot who had flown missions in Earth's atmosphere for over 20 years. He had never piloted a spacecraft before this assignment, but he understood the principles of aerial combat better than anyone else on the team. These fighters they gave us are flying coffins, Frank told his pilots during their briefing. The armor is thin, the weapons are weak, and the life support systems are basic, but they're fast and they're maneuverable. Pilot Helen Ross raised her hand. What's our strategy, sir? Frank smiled. We're going to do what humans do best. We're going to be unpredictable. The human fighters were indeed primitive compared to Vorton ships. But Frank's pilots had an advantage that no alien force expected. They had learned to think creatively under pressure. They had learned to turn weaknesses into strengths. Navigator. Paul Kelly discovered that their primitive missile systems, while slow and weak, were almost invisible to modern sensors. The Vorthon defense systems were designed to track sophisticated projectiles. They couldn't detect simple rockets that flew in straight lines. On the ground, Captain Sam White prepared his infantry units for asteroid warfare. Sam was a combat veteran who had fought in desert and jungle environments on Earth. Fighting on airless rocks in space was new to him, but the principles of infantry combat remained the same. Sam's soldiers learned to use their unreliable energy weapons as heating devices. The weapons tended to overheat quickly, but that excess heat could be used to warm their base camps in the cold asteroids. They turned a design flaw into a survival tool. Engineer Rachel Kim made the discovery that would change everything. Rachel was studying the power systems in their obsolete equipment when she realized something that the aliens had probably forgotten. The old power cells could be connected together to create massive energy spikes. "It's like daisy-chaining car batteries," Rachel explained to Jake. "Individually, these power cells are weak, but if we connect enough of them together, we can create energy bursts that rival modern weapons." Jake looked at the technical drawings Rachel had prepared. "How many power cells would we need?" "For a really big blast? Maybe 50 or 60, Rachel said. "We'd have to strip them from our weapons and armor, but the result would be devastating." As the human forces prepared for their second battle, Jake realized that something had changed in his soldiers. They no longer saw their obsolete equipment as a disadvantage. They saw it as a challenge to overcome. Every limitation became an opportunity to innovate. The aliens had given humanity museum pieces, expecting them to fail. Instead, the humans had learned to fight in ways that no galactic military academy taught. They had become something that the galaxy had never seen before. They had become unpredictable. The asteroid belt around Proxima Station looked like a graveyard of rocks floating in space. Commander Frank Butler sat in his fighter cockpit, watching the Vorthon Armada take positions among the larger asteroids. Their ships were sleek and deadly, covered in weapons that could destroy his entire squadron with a single volley. "All units, this is Butler," Frank spoke into his radio. "Remember what we practiced. Stay low, stay quiet, and don't give them a clean shot." Pilot Helen Ross checked her weapons one more time. The missiles mounted under her fighter's wings were simple rockets that looked ancient compared to the smart weapons the Vorthon used. But Helen had learned something during training that gave her confidence. "Butler, this is Ross," she said. "I'm reading their sensor sweeps. They're looking for advanced guidance systems. Our dumb rockets aren't showing up on their screens." Navigator Paul Kelly had positioned his fighter near a cluster of small asteroids. His job was to guide the attack and keep track of enemy movements. Paul's instruments were basic compared to modern galactic equipment, but they were reliable and hard to detect. "I count 24 Vorthon fighters," Paul reported. "They're spread out in a defensive formation. Looks like they're expecting us to attack head-on." Frank smiled inside his helmet. The Vorthon were thinking like modern galactic military forces. They expected the humans to use advanced tactics and sophisticated weapons. They had no idea what was coming. "All units, execute. Plan chaos," Frank ordered. The human fighters broke formation and scattered in all directions. To the Vorthon, it looked like panic. Their sensors showed human ships flying erratic patterns that made no tactical sense. The alien pilots began to move in for easy kills. That was when Helen Ross fired her first missile. The simple rocket flew straight toward a Vorthon fighter, moving slowly compared to modern weapons. The enemy pilot saw it coming and tried to activate his defensive systems, but his computer couldn't lock onto the primitive projectile. The missile struck the Vorthon fighter and exploded. The enemy ship spun out of control and crashed into an asteroid. The alien pilot had been destroyed by a weapon that belonged in a museum. "What just happened?" came a confused voice over the Vorthon communication channel that Paul was monitoring. "Their defense systems can't track our missiles," Helen reported with excitement. "They're designed for smart weapons, not dumb rockets." The battle quickly turned into chaos. Human fighters appeared from behind asteroids, fired their primitive missiles, and disappeared before the Vorthon could respond. The alien pilots tried to use their advanced weapons, but the humans refused to stay in one place long enough to be targeted. On the largest asteroid, Captain Sam White led his ground forces against the Vorthon base. Sam's soldiers moved through the tunnels that connected different parts of the asteroid. Their energy weapons were weak, but they had learned to use them in creative ways. The asteroid was freezing cold, much colder than anything the humans had experienced on Earth. But Sam's soldiers had discovered that their weapons' tendency to overheat could be useful. They used the excess heat to keep warm and to create thermal decoys that confused enemy sensors. "White to all ground units," Sam spoke into his radio. "The Vorthon are using thermal imaging to track us. Use your weapons to create false heat signatures." The human soldiers began firing their energy weapons at rocks and metal surfaces, creating hot spots that showed up on enemy sensors. The Vorthon base defenders found themselves shooting at shadows, while the real human forces moved through different tunnels. Technician Danny Lopez had set up his modified weapons at strategic points throughout the asteroid. Danny's dangerous modifications allowed the obsolete energy rifles to punch through modern alien armor, but each weapon would only work for a few shots before destroying itself. "This is Lopez," Danny reported. "I've got clear shots at their command center, but I can only fire each weapon once before it burns out." "Make them count," Sam replied. Danny fired his first modified weapon. The energy beam was 3 times more powerful than the original design. It cut through the Vorthon command center's armor like it was paper. The alien defenders inside scrambled for cover as their supposedly safe position became a death trap. The second shot took out the base's main power generator. The third destroyed their communication array. By the time Danny's weapons burned out from the modifications, the Vorthon base was blind and powerless. Engineer Rachel Kim was working on her biggest project yet. Rachel had connected 60 power cells from various pieces of human equipment to create a massive energy bomb. The weapon was crude and dangerous, but it had more destructive power than anything the humans had been given. "Kim to ground command." Rachel spoke into her radio. "The big surprise is ready, but I need to get close to their main fortress." "How close?" Sam asked. "About 50 meters," Rachel replied, "and I'll need to trigger it manually. The blast will probably destroy everything within a kilometer." Sam understood what Rachel was telling him. She was volunteering for a suicide mission. "Rachel, there has to be another way." "Maybe there is," Rachel said after thinking for a moment. "What if we use one of those powered armor suits as a delivery system? Ben Wright showed us how to make them into remote bombs." "Corporal," Ben Wright's voice came over the radio, "I can rig a suit to carry Rachel's bomb and walk it into position. We can trigger it from a safe distance." The plan was risky, but it was better than losing Rachel. Ben quickly modified one of their powered armor suits to carry Rachel's improvised weapon. The suit would walk into the Vorthon fortress like a robot, then explode with enough force to level the entire structure. "Sending the delivery bot," Ben reported. "Everyone get to minimum safe distance." The modified armor suit walked across the asteroid's surface toward the Vorthon fortress. Enemy soldiers shot at it with their advanced weapons, but the old human armor was too tough to stop easily. The suit kept walking until it reached the fortress walls. The explosion lit up the entire asteroid belt. Rachel's improvised bomb created a blast that destroyed not only the fortress, but several smaller asteroids nearby. The Vorthon base was completely wiped out. In space, the fighter battle was going just as well for the humans. Frank Butler's pilots had destroyed half the enemy squadron using their primitive missiles and unpredictable tactics. The Vorthon were confused and demoralized. "This is impossible," came another voice over the enemy communication channel. "How are they hitting us with such old weapons?" Paul Kelly had been monitoring enemy communications throughout the battle. He was learning valuable information about how Galactic military forces thought and operated. "Butler, they're requesting reinforcements. They don't understand how we're winning." Frank looked at his tactical display. The humans had lost only 3 fighters while destroying 18 enemy ships. It was a victory that should have been impossible given their inferior equipment. "All units prepare for Phase 2, Frank ordered. "Let's finish this." The second phase of the attack involved the human fighters working together in ways that no Galactic military academy taught. They used their primitive weapons and basic equipment to create combined attacks that overwhelmed the remaining Vorthon defenders. By the end of the battle, the Vorthon armada had been completely defeated. The humans had won another impossible victory using weapons that their enemies considered obsolete. But Jake Morrison knew that word of this battle would spread even faster than news of their first victory. Somewhere in the galaxy, alien military. Commanders were beginning to realize that humanity's primitive approach to warfare was not a weakness. It was something much more dangerous. It was completely unpredictable. The fortress world of Karen 5 rose from space like a massive metal mountain. General Matt Thompson stood on the bridge of his command ship, studying the planet through powerful telescopes. The entire world was covered in defensive structures, weapon platforms, and military bases. It was the strongest fortress in the galaxy. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Trade Consortium," said Major Julie Adams, his chief strategist. Julie had joined the Earth Defense Corps after studying military history at Harvard. She understood both human and alien warfare better than most people. Matt nodded to the communications officer. The holographic image of Ambassador Zektar appeared in the center of the bridge. The alien's expression was different from their first meeting. There was less confidence and more concern in his large dark eyes. "General Thompson," Zektar began, "the final test will take place on Karen 5. Your forces will face the combined military might of 6 different species. This is your last chance to prove that humanity deserves membership in our consortium." Matt noticed that Zektar didn't call it a mock battle this time. The alien was being more honest about what this test really meant. "How many enemy forces should we expect?" "Approximately 10,000 soldiers from our finest military units," Zektar replied. "They will be equipped with the most advanced weapons available. We have decided that your previous victories require a more serious response." After the transmission ended, Matt turned to his staff. Captain Roy Mitchell, his logistics expert, was already working on supply calculations. Roy had served in 3 different wars and knew how to keep an army running in hostile territory. "Sir, they're bringing everything they have," Roy said. 6 species, top-tier equipment, and a fortress that's never been captured. They're not taking any chances this time. Matt walked to the tactical display where his officers were studying the planet's defenses. Lieutenant Nina Foster, his communications expert, had been analyzing enemy radio traffic for weeks. Nina had learned to understand several alien languages during her time with the Corps. "The interesting thing is what they're not saying," Nina reported. "I've been monitoring their communications. They're scared, sir. Really scared." Staff Sergeant Bill Turner looked up from his demolitions planning. Bill was an expert with explosives who could make bombs out of almost anything. He had been studying the power cells from their obsolete equipment and working on new ways to use them. "Scared of what?" Bill asked. "We're still using the same old weapons they gave us." Major Adams pulled up reports from across the galaxy. "That's exactly what they're scared of. Word has spread about our tactics. Other species are starting to copy our methods." Matt read through the reports with growing amazement. Dozens of species that had been considered weak by galactic standards were now using human-style warfare. They were taking their own obsolete equipment and finding creative ways to make it effective. The Zelani Republic just defeated a hegemony patrol using modified mining equipment, Adams continued. The Corvin Federation won a border dispute by turning their cargo ships into weapons platforms. Everyone is learning to fight like humans. Sergeant, Major Chris Lee entered the briefing room carrying a data pad full of tactical information. Chris was a veteran who had worked his way up from private, over 20 years of service. He understood soldiers better than anyone else in the Corps. "Sir, I've been talking to our people," Chris said. "Morale is high. The soldiers know they're fighting with museum pieces, but they don't care anymore. They've learned to make those. Weapons work." Gunnery Sergeant Mary Cooper nodded in agreement. Mary had trained thousands of soldiers during her career and could tell when troops were ready for battle. "They're not thinking like victims anymore, sir. They're thinking like hunters." Matt made his decision. "We're going to give them exactly what they don't expect. We're going to fight this battle like no galactic force has ever fought before." The human assault on Karen 5 began 3 days later. Instead of attacking the heavily defended main fortresses, Matt's forces landed in the planet's wilderness areas. They came down in small groups, scattered across the entire world. Captain Alex Turner led the main assault force. Alex was a combat veteran who had learned to love the challenge of fighting with inferior equipment. His soldiers carried their obsolete weapons like badges of honor. The aliens had prepared for a conventional attack. They expected the humans to assault their strongest positions with frontal attacks. Instead, the human forces disappeared into the forests and mountains, appearing only to strike isolated outposts before vanishing again. The first major surprise came when Bill Turner's demolition teams began attacking the planet's infrastructure. Instead of targeting military bases, they went after power plants, communication centers, and supply depots. The aliens found their advanced equipment useless without power or communications. "Turner to command," Bill's voice crackled over the radio. "We just took out the main power grid for the northern continent. Their fancy weapons don't work so well without electricity." The alien defenders tried to adapt, but they had spent centuries learning to fight conventional wars. Human tactics made no sense to them. The humans attacked civilian targets that had no military value. They used weapons that should have been ineffective. They fought in ways that violated every rule of galactic warfare. Sergeant Major Lee led a special unit that targeted enemy command structures. Instead of trying to destroy the buildings, they focused on capturing alien officers. Lee's soldiers had learned that information was more valuable than territory. "We've got 3 enemy generals," Lee reported after a successful raid. "Turns out their advanced armor doesn't help much when you attack at night with knives and clubs." The psychological effect was devastating. Alien soldiers who had never lost a battle found themselves defeated by primitives using weapons from a museum. Their confidence shattered as reports came in of impossible human victories. Gunnery Sergeant Cooper discovered that their basic medical supplies were causing problems for alien forces in unexpected ways. Human medicine was designed for Earth biology, but it had strange effects on other species. "We're not trying to poison them," Cooper explained to Matt. "But our basic antiseptic makes their skin break out in rashes. Our pain medication makes them dizzy. They're more afraid of our medical gear than our weapons." The tide of battle turned when the humans began coordinating attacks across the entire planet. They used their primitive communication systems to create a network that the aliens couldn't understand or intercept. Nina Foster had learned that complex alien communication systems could be jammed, but simple radio waves were nearly impossible to stop. The humans could coordinate their attacks while the enemy stumbled around blind and deaf. "All units, this is Thompson," Matt broadcast to his forces. "Execute final phase. Show them what humans can do when we stop playing by their rules." The final assault combined everything the humans had learned. They used their obsolete weapons in ways that no alien military academy had ever imagined. They turned every weakness into a strength and every limitation into an opportunity. Captain Turner's forces overran the main fortress using tactics that would have been considered impossible by galactic standards. They climbed walls that were supposed to be unclimbable. They broke through doors that were supposed to be unbreakable. They did it all with equipment that was older than some of the soldiers using it. By the end of the 3rd day, the fortress, world of Karen 5 had fallen. The combined forces of 6 alien species had been defeated by humans using weapons that belonged in a museum. The impossible had become reality, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Luke Harrison stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Fleet's flagship as it approached the Galactic Trade Consortium's capital station. The massive structure stretched for hundreds of kilometers in all directions, home to billions of TU beings from across the galaxy. But today, the station's lights seemed dimmer than usual. "Sir, we're receiving priority communications from 12 different species," reported Intelligence Officer Linda Price. Linda had spent months learning to decode alien transmissions and had become expert at reading between the lines of galactic politics. Luke looked at the list of incoming messages. Species that had never spoken to humans before were now requesting urgent meetings. Military alliances that had existed for centuries were asking Earth to join their coalitions. Most surprising of all, the Hegemony Council was requesting immediate peace negotiations. "What's the tone of these messages?" Luke asked. Linda smiled as she read through the communications. "Respectful, sir. Very respectful. Some of them sound almost scared." The truth was that news of Charon 5's fall had shaken the galaxy to its core. The fortress world had been considered impregnable for over 1,000 years. Now it had fallen. In 3 days to a species using weapons that most aliens thought belonged in museums. Commander Steve Brown entered the bridge carrying reports from across human space. Steve had been promoted to military attaché after showing exceptional skill at understanding alien psychology during the battles. "Sir, the situation is developing faster than we expected," Steve said. 17 different species have declared independence from the hegemony using human tactics. The galactic government is in chaos. Luke studied the tactical displays showing the current state of galactic politics. Red zones marked areas where traditional military forces were being defeated by rebels using obsolete equipment and human-style warfare. The infection of human thinking was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Dr. Grace Wilson materialized as a hologram on the bridge. Grace was stationed back on Earth, where she had been analyzing the broader implications of humanity's military success. Her research into galactic history had revealed disturbing patterns. "Admiral, I've finished my analysis of why our tactics work so well," Grace began. "The galactic civilization has been stagnant for over 2,000 years. They've become completely dependent on technology and have forgotten how to think creatively." Luke nodded for her to continue. "Every species that joins the galactic community goes through the same process," Grace explained. "They're given advanced technology and taught to fight according to established doctrine. Over time, they lose their ability to innovate. They become predictable." "But not humans," Steve observed. "Exactly," Grace replied. "We had to fight with obsolete equipment, so we never lost our ability to adapt. We're the first species in galactic history to maintain our tactical creativity." After joining the consortium, the first diplomatic meeting took place aboard a neutral station in deep space. Luke found himself sitting across from Ambassador Zektar and representatives from dozens of different species. The atmosphere in the room was completely different from their first encounter. "Admiral Harrison," Zektar began, his voice lacking the confidence it had held months earlier. "The Galactic Trade Consortium formally recognizes Earth as a full member with all rights and privileges." Luke remained silent, waiting to hear the rest of their offer. "Furthermore," continued another alien representative, this one from the Korthak Empire, "we would like to propose a military partnership between Earth and the established galactic powers." A third alien representing the Vorthan Armada leaned forward nervously. "We have much to learn from human tactical innovation. Perhaps Earth would consider sharing some of your military expertise." Luke almost laughed at the irony. The same aliens who had given humans obsolete weapons as a setup for failure were now begging those same humans to teach them how to fight. "What exactly are you offering in return?" Luke asked. Zektar activated a holographic display showing star maps and trade routes. Full access to galactic technology, prime territory in 3 different star systems, and representation on the Hegemony Council. "And in exchange?" "We want Earth to help us restore order to the galaxy," Zektar replied. "Your tactics have inspired rebellions across dozens of worlds. Traditional military forces can't stop them because they're using human-style warfare." Luke understood what was really happening. The galactic powers had created a monster they couldn't control. By forcing humans to fight with obsolete equipment, they had accidentally created a new form of warfare that their advanced civilization couldn't counter. President Janet Clark's voice came through the communication system from Earth. Janet had been promoted from her military service to become the civilian leader of Earth's government. Her experience as a soldier gave her credibility that no career politician could match. "Admiral Harrison, you have full authority to negotiate on Earth's behalf," Janet said. "But remember that we're not just representing humanity anymore. We're representing every species that's learned to fight like humans." Luke looked around the table at the alien representatives. These beings had ruled the galaxy for millennia, but now they needed help from the primitives they had tried to manipulate. "Earth accepts membership in the galactic community," Luke said finally. "But we have conditions." The aliens leaned forward eagerly. "First, any species that wants independence from the hegemony gets it. No more forced membership in your consortium." Zektar started to object, but Luke held up his hand. "Second, Earth will establish a military academy to teach adaptive warfare to any species that wants to learn. Your people are welcome to attend, but they'll learn as students, not teachers." And third? Asked the Vorthan representative. Luke smiled. Third, Earth reserves the right to continue using obsolete equipment. We've grown quite fond of our museum pieces. 6 months later, Admiral Morrison stood in the training facility on Luna, watching alien officers struggle to understand human tactical concepts. The beings who had once considered themselves superior were now fumbling with basic lessons about adaptive thinking. Sir, the Korthak delegation is having trouble with the improvised explosives course, reported Sergeant Amy Clark, who had been promoted to head instructor. They keep asking for instruction manuals. Morrison walked over to observe the Korthak students. These same aliens had nearly destroyed his forces in the first battle, but now they couldn't figure out how to make a simple bomb from spare parts. The problem is that they're still thinking like galactic military officers, Morrison explained to Amy. They want everything to be standardized and predictable. They don't understand that chaos can be a weapon. In another part of the facility, Engineer Rachel Kim was teaching a class on equipment modification to students from 12 different species. Rachel had become famous across the galaxy as the inventor of the power cell bomb that destroyed the Vorthan fortress. Remember, there's no such thing as obsolete equipment, Rachel told her students. There are only obsolete ways of thinking about equipment. A young alien raised his hand. But Instructor Kim, our military regulations forbid unauthorized modifications to standard equipment. Rachel smiled. Then maybe you should think about changing your regulations. The final scene took place in Earth's Orbital Command Center, where Luke Harrison reviewed reports from across the galaxy. The old order was crumbling as species after species learned to think like humans. Traditional military hierarchies were being replaced by flexible command structures. Advanced weapons were being abandoned in favor of reliable, adaptable equipment. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Zilani Republic, Linda Price reported. They've successfully driven the hegemony forces out of their home system using modified mining equipment and guerrilla tactics. Luke nodded with satisfaction. The Zilani were one of the first species to adopt human-style warfare, and their success was inspiring others. Any word from the Hegemony Council? Luke asked. They're requesting another meeting, Linda replied. Something about revising the Galactic military doctrine. Luke looked out at the stars, thinking about how much had changed since that first meeting with Ambassador Zektar. The aliens had given humans obsolete weapons, expecting them to fail. Instead, humanity had turned those weapons into tools of revolution that were reshaping the entire galaxy. The galaxy had learned the hard way that there was no such thing as obsolete equipment in the hands of people who refused to give up. Human tactics had become the new standard for military excellence, and the species that had once looked down on Earth now competed for the chance to learn from human instructors. The primitives had become the teachers, and the galaxy would never underestimate human ingenuity again.